They laughed when Thandiwe stumbled. A pregnant woman, barefoot, dust clinging to her dress, stood trembling in the middle of a crowded Soweto market as voices rose around her, sharp, cruel, relentless. "Thief!" someone shouted. Phones lifted. Faces twisted in amusement. No one stepped forward. She tried to speak, but her voice broke. Then a shove hard enough to send her crashing to the ground. A gasp rippled, but no one helped. Not even the well-dressed man standing just a few steps away, watching everything in silence. His eyes didn't show pity, only recognition, and something far more dangerous. Before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? If stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one. Long before anyone in Soweto would look at Thandiwe Ndlovu and see only dust on her feet and shame in her silence, there had been a time when people looked at her and saw promise. She had not always walked with her head lowered. There was a time when Thandiwe's laughter carried through wide hallways, polished to a shine, when her dresses were pressed by careful hands, when her name opened doors before she even reached them. She had grown up in a home where the gates were taller than most houses, where security guards nodded respectfully, and where her father's voice could move men twice his age to silence. But none of that mattered now. Now Thandiwe walked barefoot through the uneven streets of Soweto, her swollen belly shifting her balance as she carried a shallow basin of oranges on her head. The sun pressed down hard against her skin, and sweat gathered at the edges of her neck, slipping slowly beneath the faded fabric of her dress. Fresh oranges, sweet oranges, she called, her voice steady despite the dryness in her throat. Most people did not stop. Some glanced at her and looked away quickly as if poverty were something contagious. Others stared longer, their eyes lingering on her stomach, on the absence of a ring on her finger, on the quiet dignity she still refused to let go of. There were whispers, too. There she is. The one whose man ran away. Pregnant and still roaming the streets. No shame. Thandiwe heard them all. She always did. But she had learned something in the months since. Everything fell apart. Words could bruise, but they could not feed you. And hunger was louder than shame. So she kept walking. At the edge of a busy intersection where taxis hooted and vendors shouted over one another, she lowered the basin carefully onto a wooden crate. Her back ached immediately, the dull, constant pain she had come to accept as part of her new life. A woman approached, well-dressed, her heels clicking sharply against the ground. How much, she asked, without looking directly at Thandiwe. 10 rand each, madam, Thandiwe replied politely. The woman picked up one orange, turned it in her hand, then frowned. These are small, she said. I'll give you 5. Thandiwe hesitated. 5 was barely enough. But she had not sold anything all morning. Please, madam, they are fresh. I can make it 8. The woman scoffed, already placing the orange back. Keep it, she muttered, walking away as if the conversation had wasted her time. Thandiwe swallowed the tightness in her chest. Thank you, madam, she said anyway, even though the woman was already gone. Gratitude, she had learned, cost nothing, even when it felt like it took everything. Hours passed. The sun shifted slowly, but the heat did not ease. Her feet grew sore from standing, and the child inside her moved in slow, heavy turns that made her pause now and then, pressing her palm gently against her stomach. I know, she whispered once, her voice soft, almost lost in the noise of the street. I know, my baby. We will eat soon. By late afternoon, she had sold only a handful of oranges. Not enough. Never enough. As she lifted the basin again to move further down the road, a sudden wave of dizziness swept over her. The world tilted slightly, sounds stretching and blurring at the edges. She steadied herself against a nearby pole, breathing slowly. You cannot fall, she murmured under her breath. Not now, because falling meant attention, and attention, she had learned, rarely came with kindness. Still, she pushed forward step by careful step until she reached a quieter stretch near a row of small, worn-down buildings. Here, fewer people passed, but those who did sometimes bought out of habit rather than judgment. She set the basin down again. For a while, nothing happened. Then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed movement, a frail figure sitting close to the wall, wrapped in layers of old cloth despite the heat. An elderly woman. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the scarf around her head, her eyes distant, unfocused in a way that spoke of exhaustion deeper than sleep could fix. Thandiwe watched her for a moment. Then she looked back at her basin. 7 oranges left. If she sold all 7, she could buy bread, maybe even a little milk. If she didn't, she exhaled slowly. Then, without allowing herself more time to think, she picked up one orange and walked toward the old woman. "Go," she said gently, using the respectful term for grandmother, "please. Take this." The old woman looked up surprised. "For me?" she asked, her voice thin. Thandiwe nodded, placing the orange carefully into her hands. "Yes, you should eat." The woman stared at her for a long moment as if trying to understand why. "But you are also," she began, her eyes drifting toward Thandiwe's stomach. "I will be okay," Thandiwe said softly, offering a small smile that did not quite reach her tired eyes. There was no grand gesture in the moment. No one clapped. No one noticed. The street continued as it always did, busy, indifferent, moving forward without pause. But something quiet settled between them. The old woman's fingers closed around the fruit, and for a brief second her eyes softened with something close to relief. "God sees you, child," she whispered. Thandiwe lowered her gaze slightly. "I hope so," she replied. She turned back toward her basin, lifting it once more onto her head. 6 oranges left now. Less money. More uncertainty. But somehow, her steps felt a little steadier. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in muted shades of orange and gold, Thandiwe began the long walk toward the small room she could barely still call hers. Or rather, the room she was about to lose. Because that morning, before she had stepped out to sell, the landlord had stood at her door, his arms crossed, his patience gone. "If you don't pay by tonight," he had said flatly, "you leave. No pleading. No negotiation. Just a deadline." Now, as she walked, each step carried the weight of that ultimatum. She reached the narrow alley where the building stood, cracked walls, rusted doors, windows that barely closed. Home. For now. She pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the room was small. A thin mattress in one corner. A plastic bucket. A single chair. Nothing more. She set the basin down carefully, then reached into the small cloth tied at her waist, counting the coins she had earned. Once. Twice. Her hands trembled slightly. It wasn't enough. Not even close. A knock came at the door. Sharp. Impatient. Thandiwe froze. Then slowly she walked toward it and opened it just a little. The landlord stood there, his expression already telling her he knew the answer. "Well?" he asked. Thandiwe swallowed. I don't have it yet," she said quietly. "Please, just one more day. I will try." "No," he cut in immediately. "You've said that before." Her fingers tightened against the edge of the door. "I'm begging you," she whispered. "I have nowhere else to go." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone. "You should have thought of that earlier," he said coldly. "By morning, you're out." The door closed. Not by him. By her. Slowly. Gently. As if making noise would break something inside her that she was still trying to hold together. She leaned her forehead against the wood, her eyes closing. Outside, the world continued, voices, footsteps, life moving forward. Inside, everything felt like it was standing still. One night left. And after that, nothing. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "I'm still here," she whispered to the child inside her. "I'm still trying." But for the first time in a long while, even she didn't know what that would be enough for. That night stretched longer than any Thandiwe could remember. The small room seemed to shrink around her as darkness settled in, pressing against the cracked walls, seeping through the thin curtain that barely covered the window. Outside, the usual sounds of Soweto continued, distant laughter, the rumble of taxis, music drifting faintly from somewhere far away, but inside everything felt unbearably still. Sleep did not come. She sat on the edge of her mattress, one hand resting on her stomach, the other loosely holding the few coins she had left. She counted them again, even though she already knew the number by heart. It had not changed. It would not change. A soft kick came from within her. Thandiwe inhaled sharply, her fingers pressing gently against her belly. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm still here." But even as she said it, a quiet fear began to grow. What did here mean if there was nowhere left to go? By the time the first pale light of dawn crept into the room, she had made her decision. She would not wait to be thrown out. Dignity, she had learned, sometimes meant leaving before you were pushed. Slowly, she gathered her few belongings, a folded cloth, a worn shawl, the basin she used for selling fruit. There was nothing else, nothing worth packing. Before stepping out, she paused. Her eyes lingered on the empty space behind her. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember a different kind of room, one filled with warmth, with voices that once called her name with love instead of judgment. Then she turned away. There was no space for memories now. Outside, the morning air was cooler, but it carried the same weight of uncertainty. Thandiwe adjusted the basin on her head and began walking not toward the market this time, but toward anywhere that might offer a chance, however small. The streets were already waking. Vendors setting up stalls, children running barefoot, women balancing buckets on their heads with practiced ease, life relentless and indifferent. As she reached a familiar corner, she saw her. Gogo Maseko. The old woman sat in the same place as the day before, her back against the wall, her thin frame wrapped in layers that no longer kept the cold away. Her eyes lifted as Thandiwe approached, and recognition flickered immediately. "You came back," Gogo said softly. Thandiwe managed a small smile. "Yes, Gogo." The old woman studied her more closely this time, her tired eyes, the absence of anything in her hands except the basin, the quiet heaviness in her posture. "You did not sleep," Gogo murmured. Thandiwe did not answer directly. "I had to leave my room," she said instead, her voice calm but thin. "I could not pay." Gogo nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she had already expected. "Sit," she said, patting the space beside her. For a moment, Thandiwe hesitated. Time was money, and she had neither. But something in Gogo's voice, something steady, something grounding, made her lower herself carefully to the ground. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that did not demand to be filled. Then Gogo spoke again. "You are not from here," she said. It was not a question. Thandiwe looked ahead at the street. "No," she admitted quietly. "You carry yourself like someone who once had more than this," Gogo continued. Thandiwe let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but without humor. "Once," she said. Gogo turned her head slightly. "What happened?" The question lingered between them. Thandiwe's fingers tightened slightly over her stomach. "I left," she said after a moment. "Or you were pushed." Thandiwe closed her eyes briefly. "Both," she whispered. Gogo did not press further. Some stories did not need to be told all at once. Instead, she reached into the folds of her cloth and brought out something small, a piece of dry bread barely enough for one person. She broke it in half and offered a piece to Thandiwe. "Eat." Thandiwe shook her head immediately. "No, Gogo. You need it." "And you do," not the old woman asked, her voice firm despite its softness. "I can manage," Thandiwe insisted. Gogo held her gaze. "You are feeding too now." The words landed deeper than expected. For a moment, Thandiwe's resolve wavered. Then slowly she accepted the bread. "Thank you," she said quietly. They ate in silence. It was not enough to satisfy hunger, but it was enough to remind her what it felt like not to be completely alone. After a while, Thandiwe stood again. "I need to try and sell," she said. "Maybe today will be better." Gogo nodded. "Go," she said. "But remember, the world tests those it plans to reveal." Thandiwe frowned slightly. "I don't understand." Gogo smiled faintly. "You will." With that, Thandiwe adjusted her basin and walked back toward the market. But something had shifted. Not in her circumstances, but inside her. The market was already louder than the day before, voices overlapping, music blaring from small speakers, the smell of fried food mixing with dust and heat. Thandiwe found a small space near a row of vendors and set her basin down. "Oranges. Fresh oranges," she called again. This time her voice carried a little more strength. A man approached, picking up 2 oranges without asking. "How much?" he said. 10 rand each," she replied. He nodded, pulling out a note. For a brief moment, relief flickered through her. Then, "Hey," a sharp voice cut through the air. Thandiwe turned. A woman pushed through the crowd, her face tight with accusation. She was known in the market, loud, proud, always quick to speak and quicker to judge. "You Namsa," snapped, pointing directly at Thandiwe. "Where did you get those oranges?" Thandiwe blinked, confused. "I bought them this morning," she said carefully. Namsa stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "Don't lie," she said. "I had a crate missing from my stall. And now suddenly you are selling." Murmurs began to rise. People turned, phones lifted. Thandiwe's chest tightened. "I did not take anything," she said, her voice steady but strained. "I paid for these, from where Namsa demanded." Thandiwe hesitated. The truth was simple, but proving it was not. I I bought them from a supplier near the station, she said. Namsa laughed sharply. You expect us to believe that, she said, turning to the crowd. A homeless pregnant girl suddenly has money to buy stock. The murmurs grew louder. Thandiwe felt the ground shift beneath her, not physically, but in the way that mattered. Perception. Once it turned against you, truth no longer mattered. I am not lying, she said louder this time. Namsa's expression hardened. Search her, she said to no one in particular. Before Thandiwe could react, hands reached toward her basin, lifting oranges, examining them as if they carried proof. They look like mine, someone said. Same size, another added. That means nothing, Thandiwe said, quickly, panic beginning to edge into her voice. Many people sell the same. Enough, Namsa snapped. She stepped forward and shoved the basin. Oranges spilled across the ground, rolling in every direction. A few people laughed. Others stepped back. No one helped. Thandiwe stared at the scattered fruit, her heart pounding. Each orange was money. Each one was survival. And now they were rolling away from her. I did not steal, she said again, but this time her voice broke. Namsa folded her arms. Of course you didn't, she said mockingly. You just happened to have what I lost. A phone camera moved closer to Thandiwe's face. Say that again, someone urged. Say you didn't steal. Heat rushed to her cheeks. Not from the sun. From humiliation. I didn't steal, she whispered. Louder, the voice insisted. Her hands trembled. I didn't steal, she cried. The words echoed, but they did not convince anyone. Instead, the crowd leaned in closer. And just like that, the day that had begun with a small piece of hope collapsed into something far darker, because this time it was not just hunger she was fighting. It was judgment. And judgment, once it found its voice, rarely stopped. The laughter did not come all at once. It started in fragments, short bursts, low chuckles, whispers that spread like a quiet infection through the crowd. Then it grew louder, sharper, until it wrapped itself around Thandiwe like a net she could not escape. She remained standing in the middle of it, her breath uneven, her eyes fixed on the oranges scattered across the dusty ground. Each one felt like a piece of her dignity rolling away. Pick them up, someone said mockingly. Or maybe thieves don't bend down anymore. Another voice followed louder. Careful, she might hide them again. A few people laughed openly now. Phones were raised higher. Thandiwe swallowed hard. Slowly, she lowered herself to her knees. The ground was rough beneath her skin, small stones pressing into her palms as she reached for the nearest orange. Her movements were careful, not just because of her condition, but because every motion felt, watched, judged, recorded. She picked one up. Then another. A shadow fell over her. Namsa Kumalo stood directly in front of her arms, crossed, her expression unreadable but her presence heavy. You see, Namsa said loudly, turning slightly so others could hear. This is how it starts. First they pretend to be innocent. Then they steal from people who are actually working. Thandiwe's fingers tightened around the orange in her hand. I am working, she said quietly. Namsa tilted her head. Working, she repeated, almost amused. Is that what you call this? She gestured dismissively at Thandiwe's swollen belly. Walking around pregnant, begging sympathy, the words landed harder than any shove. Thandiwe lifted her gaze slowly. I am not begging, she said, her voice low but firm. Namsa's lips curved slightly. No, she asked. Then what do you call it? Thandiwe did not answer. Because no answer would matter. Around them, the crowd shifted, some leaning closer, others whispering among themselves. A few faces showed uncertainty now, but none stepped forward. Silence, she had learned, was often louder than cruelty. She reached for another orange, but before her fingers could close around it, a foot nudged it away. She froze. The orange rolled just out of reach. A man standing nearby shrugged casually. Oops, he said, though there was no apology in his tone. A ripple of laughter followed. Thandiwe inhaled slowly, her chest tightening. Not from anger. From something deeper, something heavier. She reached again, this time stretching slightly further, her balance shifting as she leaned forward. A sudden wave of dizziness hit her. The ground tilted. For a brief moment, everything blurred, the voices, the movement, the heat. She pressed one hand firmly against her stomach. Not now, she whispered under her breath. But her body did not listen. Her vision darkened at the edges, and before she could steady herself, she slipped. Her palm lost its grip on the ground, and her body gave way, falling sideways with a dull thud. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, but it was not followed by help. Only curiosity. Did she faint? Maybe she's pretending. Careful, she might blame us. Thandiwe lay still for a moment, her breath shallow, her heart racing against her ribs. Pain spread through her side, but it was the fear that cut deeper. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly. The baby. Everything else disappeared. "Please," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Please be okay." A faint movement answered her touch. Small. But enough. Relief flooded her chest so quickly it almost hurt. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm here." Around her, the crowd leaned in again. Some whispered. Some recorded. Some simply watched. But no one reached out. Not yet. Not until a different voice cut through the noise. "What is going on here?" It was not loud, but it carried authority. The kind that did not need to raise itself to be heard. The crowd shifted instinctively, parting slightly as the source of the voice stepped forward. He was dressed simply, but not cheaply. A dark jacket, clean lines, shoes that had not touched dust for long. His posture was straight, his gaze sharp but controlled. Thandiwe Ndlovu. But to the crowd, he was just another man. For now. His eyes moved quickly, taking in the scattered oranges, the phones, the woman on the ground. Then they stopped. On her. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Not recognition. Not yet, but something close. He stepped closer. "Why is she on the ground?" he asked. Namsa turned toward him, her expression shifting instantly, less aggressive, more measured. "She was caught stealing," Namsa said smoothly. "We were just handling it." Saifo's gaze did not leave Thandiwe. "Handling it," he repeated. There was no anger in his voice, but there was weight. Namsa hesitated for the briefest moment. "Yes," she said. "She took from my stall. These oranges. Did you see her take them?" Saifo interrupted. The question landed cleanly. Directly. Namsa blinked. "Well, no. But they are mine. I know my goods." Saifo's eyes narrowed slightly. "Knowing is not the same as seeing," he said. A murmur moved through the crowd. Thandiwe shifted slightly on the ground, her strength slowly returning, though her body still trembled. She looked up, and for the first time she saw him. There was something about the way he stood, the way he spoke, something familiar and yet distant. Her brow furrowed faintly, but the thought slipped away before it could form. Too much was happening. Too much pain. Too much noise. Sifo noticed the way she looked at him. Not fear, not defiance, something else. But he could not place it. Not yet. He crouched slightly, not fully kneeling, but lowering himself enough to be closer to her level. "Can you stand?" he asked. His voice was calmer now, softer. Thandiwe hesitated, then nodded faintly. I think so," she said. He extended a hand. For a moment she stared at it. Not because she did not want to take it, but because she was not used to being offered one. Slowly she reached out. Their hands touched, and something shifted. It was not visible. Not to the crowd. But it was there. A quiet, almost imperceptible pause, as if time itself had taken a breath. Saifo felt it first. A strange familiarity, a memory that had not yet fully surfaced. He tightened his grip slightly, helping her up carefully. "Easy," he said. Thandiwe rose slowly, her balance unsteady but holding. Their hands separated. But the feeling lingered. Namsa watched the interaction, her eyes narrowing again. "This is not your concern," she said, her tone returning to sharpness. "We are dealing with a thief." Saifo straightened. Now his presence felt different. Less like a passerby, more like something solid. "It becomes my concern," he said calmly, "when a crowd decides guilt before truth." The words landed, and this time, the laughter did not return. Instead, something else began to spread. Uncertainty. But the storm was not over. Not even close. Because while doubt had entered the crowd, judgment had not yet left. And for Thandiwe, the worst of it was still coming. The market did not return to normal after that. It only shifted. Where there had been loud laughter moments before, there was now a strange tension, like the air before a storm that had not yet decided whether to break. People did not leave. They leaned in closer. Curiosity had replaced mockery, but it was no kinder. Thandiwe stood unsteadily, her body still recovering from the fall. Her hand remained protectively over her stomach, her breath slow but uneven. The dizziness had not fully passed, but she forced herself to stay upright, because falling again would mean losing what little control she still had. Thandiwe Ndlovu stood a short distance from her now, his posture composed, his gaze steady. But inside, something had begun to shift in a way he did not yet understand. He had not expected to stop. He had not expected to care. He had come to Soweto for a reason, one that had nothing to do with a crowded market or a pregnant street vendor accused of theft. And yet, his eyes moved back to her. There was something about her face, something that tugged at a place in his memory he had long tried to keep quiet. Nomsa Kumalo stepped forward again, unwilling to lose control of the situation she had created. "This is simple," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "My goods were taken. Now they are here." "What more do you need?" Sifo turned to her slowly. "Proof," he replied. The word was calm, but it carried weight. Nomsa's jaw tightened. "People like her don't need proof," she snapped. "Look at her. Look at her situation." A few heads nodded. Not all, but enough. Sifo's expression hardened slightly. "And what exactly are you seeing?" he asked. Nomsa gestured again, this time more aggressively. "A woman with no home, no husband, no money. And suddenly she is selling stock," she said. "You want me to pretend that makes sense?" Thandiwe flinched slightly at the words, not because they were new, but because they were being spoken as truth, as if her life had already been judged and sealed. "I paid for them," she said again, her voice trembling but determined. "From a supplier near the station. Early this morning." "Then where is the receipt?" Nomsa shot back instantly. Thandiwe froze. She had none. The man she bought from did not give receipts. People like her did not ask for them. The silence that followed said everything. Nomsa lifted her chin slightly, sensing victory. "You see," she said, turning to the crowd. "Always a story. Never proof." The murmurs returned, louder this time. Closer. Thandiwe felt her chest tighten again. Her truth was slipping, not because it wasn't real, but because it couldn't be proven. Sifo watched the exchange carefully. He had seen this before, too many times, truth bending under the weight of perception, guilt assigned not by evidence but by appearance. He stepped forward slightly. "What is your name?" he asked Thandiwe. She hesitated, then answered. "Thandiwe," she said softly. The name landed somewhere deep. Sifo felt it, a faint echo, but still, unclear. He nodded once. "Thandiwe," he repeated as if testing the sound of it. Then he turned back to Nomsa. "You are making an accusation," he said. "That requires more than assumption." Nomsa laughed dryly. "And you are defending a stranger," she replied. "That requires more than curiosity." Their eyes held, a quiet standoff. Around them the crowd shifted again, drawn now not just to the conflict but to the presence of a man who spoke differently, who did not rush, who did not raise his voice, but somehow commanded attention. Thandiwe watched him, still unsure, still distant, but something in her chest stirred faintly. Not recognition, not yet, but a feeling she could not name. Before either could speak again, a sudden voice cut through the tension. "Nomsa." A young boy pushed through the crowd, breathless. Nomsa turned sharply. "What is it?" she demanded. "The crate," the boy said, struggling to catch his breath. "We found it." Nomsa blinked. "What?" "It was behind the storage area," he continued. "It fell. Some of the oranges rolled out, but it's still there." The words landed like a crack in glass. Not loud, but irreversible. The crowd reacted immediately. Murmurs shifted tone. Eyes widened. Phones lowered slightly. Nomsa's face changed just for a second, then hardened again. "That doesn't prove anything," she said quickly. "She could have taken some before enough." Sifo's voice cut in, not raised, but final. The boy stepped back instinctively. Nomsa's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Sifo took another step forward. Now there was no mistaking it. He was no longer just a man in the crowd. There was authority in him. Unspoken, but undeniable. "You made an accusation," he said, publicly, loudly, without proof. Namsa tried to hold her ground. I had reason, you had assumption, he corrected. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Thandiwe stood still, her heart pounding not from fear now, but from something else. Relief, but fragile. Too fragile to trust yet. The crowd shifted again. But this time, it was not leaning toward judgment. It was pulling away from it. Sifo turned slightly, his gaze moving over the people gathered. How quickly we decide who is guilty, he said, not to anyone in particular, but to everyone. No one answered. Because there was nothing to say. The truth had arrived. Quietly, but completely. Thandiwe's legs felt weak again, not from exhaustion this time, but from the emotional weight pressing through her. She exhaled slowly. I told you, she whispered. Not loudly, not proudly, just truth. Namsa looked at her. For the first time, there was no certainty in her eyes, only discomfort, but pride still held her posture stiff. This is not over, she muttered. But the words had lost their strength, because the crowd had already shifted. And once a crowd changes its mind, it rarely goes back. Sifo's gaze returned to Thandiwe. Something inside him had settled now. Not fully, but enough to know this moment mattered. More than it should have. More than he expected. He looked at her again, longer this time, searching, and somewhere deep beneath memory and time, something was beginning to rise. But it had not yet reached the surface. Not yet. And Thandiwe, she did not know it, but her life had already begun to change. Not because the accusation had ended, but because someone had finally seen her. And that was only the beginning. The market did not disperse immediately. Truth had arrived, yes, but it had not erased what came before it. People lingered, not out of concern, but because something in the air had shifted and no one wanted to be the first to walk away from it. Thandiwe stood where she was, her breathing finally steadying, though her hands still trembled slightly. The scattered oranges had been mostly gathered now, some by her, a few by hesitant onlookers who avoided meeting her eyes as they placed them back into her basin. No one apologized. Not yet. Sifo remained close, his gaze moving between Thandiwe and the crowd. He had seen this pattern before, the slow retreat of confidence when people realized they had been wrong. But what interested him was not the crowd. It was her. Thandiwe. The name echoed again in his mind, clearer, now sharper. He had heard it before. Spoken in a different tone, a different time. He watched the way she adjusted the basin, the way she instinctively placed one hand beneath it, while the other rested protectively against her stomach. Something about that gesture, it stirred something old, something buried. Namsa Kumalo shifted uncomfortably where she stood. The energy that had once supported her had thinned, leaving her exposed in a way she had not expected. She cleared her throat. Well, she said, forcing a dismissive tone, it was a misunderstanding. No one responded. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Thandiwe looked up. Their eyes met briefly. There was no anger in Thandiwe's expression, no triumph, just exhaustion. I lost customers because of this, Thandiwe said quietly. Her voice was calm, but it carried something deeper than frustration. Loss. Namsa hesitated, then shrugged slightly. That is not my fault, she said. You should have been more careful. A ripple moved through the crowd. Not agreement, discomfort. Sifo's jaw tightened. Careful, he repeated. Namsa looked at him. Yes, she said defensively. People like her need to. Enough. Sifo cut in again, this time with a sharper edge. The word landed harder than before. Namsa fell silent. Sifo stepped closer, not aggressively, but with a presence that made space around him. You do not get to harm someone, he said calmly, and then dismiss it as nothing. Namsa looked away. For the first time since the confrontation began, she had no words. And the rest of you, he continued, his voice steady but firm, you watched. You recorded. You laughed. A few phones lowered completely now. Eyes dropped. Not one of you asked if she was telling the truth, he said. No one spoke, because he was right, and truth, when spoken plainly, often left no room for defense. Thandiwe felt the weight of his words, but also something else. Something unfamiliar. Someone was standing for her. Not out of pity, but out of principle. It unsettled her, because she had not expected it. Not anymore. She shifted slightly, adjusting her stance. "I don't need anyone to fight for me," she said softly. Saifo looked at her. "I know," he replied. "And yet," he added after a pause, "sometimes the fight is not about what you need. It's about what is right." Their eyes held again, this time longer. There it was again. That feeling, that pull. Thandiwe felt it too, now faint, distant, but real, as if something in her memory had been brushed, but not yet uncovered. She looked away first, not because she wanted to, but because she did not understand what she was feeling. A sudden breeze moved through the market, lifting dust slightly from the ground. The heat had begun to soften the sun, lowering slowly toward the horizon. Time had passed, more than anyone realized. Gogo Maseko watched from her usual place near the wall. She had seen everything, every word, every silence. Her old eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition. She had lived long enough to know when something unseen was unfolding. And this was not just about oranges. Back near the center of the market, the tension began to loosen. People shifted away. Conversations resumed quieter now. The moment was ending, but its impact remained. Thandiwe bent slightly, picking up the last orange near her feet. Her movements were slower now, her body still tired but steadier than before. She placed it carefully into the basin, then lifted it onto her head again. 6 oranges. Less than before, but still something. She turned slightly, preparing to leave. Saifo noticed. "Wait," he said. She paused, not turning fully, just enough to acknowledge him. "Yes," she asked. He hesitated. Not something he was used to, but this moment, it required it. "You said you bought them near the station," he said. "Do you go there every day?" Thandiwe frowned slightly. "Sometimes," she replied, "when I have enough to buy." He nodded slowly. "And where do you stay?" he asked. The question was simple, but it carried weight. Thandiwe's expression shifted. "A wall. Subtle but clear. I manage," she said. It was not an answer, but it was the only one she was willing to give. Saifo recognized it immediately. He had heard it before, from people who had nothing and refused to let that be their identity. "I see," he said quietly. There was a pause. "Then take this," he added, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a folded note. Not small, not insignificant. Thandiwe's eyes dropped briefly to his hand, then lifted again. She shook her head. "No," she said. Saifo blinked slightly. "You need it," he said. "I will earn what I need," she replied. Her voice was not defensive. It was certain. That surprised him, more than anything else that had happened. Most people in her position would have taken it, without hesitation, without question. But she didn't. "Consider it help," he said. "I did not ask for help," she answered gently. Silence. But not uncomfortable. Just real. Saifo slowly lowered his hand. There was no offense in his expression, only something deeper. Respect. "Then consider it an investment," he said after a moment. Thandiwe almost smiled. "Almost. I am not something to invest in," she said. "You might be wrong," he replied. Their eyes met one last time, and this time the feeling did not pass unnoticed. Not by either of them, but neither spoke of it. "Not yet." Thandiwe adjusted the basin again. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the money, but for something else, something harder to name." Then she turned and began to walk away. Saifo watched her go, long after the crowd had begun to dissolve, long after the market returned to its usual rhythm. He remained there, still, thinking, because something inside him had shifted. Not fully, but enough to know that this encounter was not random. And as Thandiwe disappeared into the distance, one hand steadying the basin, the other resting gently against her stomach. Neither of them knew it yet, but the past was already catching up. Slowly, quietly, inevitably, Thandiwe did not look back. Not when the noise of the market faded behind her. Not when the shadows stretched longer across the road. Not even when something inside her urged her to turn just once to see if the man was still watching. She kept walking, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking brought questions she was not ready to answer. The road ahead was uneven, lined with small shops closing for the day, children chasing each other barefoot, women calling out final prices before packing away their goods. The city moved forward as it always did, unaware of the quiet storm that had just passed through one of its corners. But inside Thandiwe, nothing felt normal. Her steps were slower now, not from exhaustion alone, but from the weight of what had just happened. The accusation, the fall, the silence of the crowd, and then him. She exhaled slowly, adjusting the basin on her head. "Focus," she murmured to herself. "You need to find a place for tonight," because reality did not wait for emotions to settle. Night was coming, and she had nowhere to go. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep shades of orange and purple, Thandiwe found herself near a cluster of unfinished buildings on the edge of the township. Construction had stopped there months ago. Now the skeletal structures stood abandoned, silent, hollow, but offering something the streets could not: shelter. She stepped carefully over broken concrete, her sandals scraping lightly against the ground. Inside one of the buildings, the air was cooler, the noise of the outside world muffled. It wasn't safe. She knew that. But safety had become a luxury long ago. She lowered the basin slowly, placing it beside a corner where the wall still stood half intact. Then she sank down beside it, her back pressing against the cold surface. For a moment she closed her eyes, not to sleep, just to rest. Her hand moved to her stomach again, tracing small circles as if to reassure both herself and the child within. "We made it through today," she whispered. A small kick answered. She smiled faintly. "Tomorrow, we try again." But even as she said it, her mind drifted. Back to the market. Back to him. There had been something in his eyes. Something that unsettled her, not because it was cruel, but because it wasn't. It was searching. And that was far more dangerous. She opened her eyes slowly, staring at the cracked ceiling above her. "Why do you feel familiar?" she murmured. The question lingered, unanswered. Across the city, far from the unfinished buildings and the dust-covered streets, Thandiwe Ndlovu sat in the back of a black SUV, his fingers resting lightly against the armrest as the city lights blurred past the window. The driver spoke once. "Sir, should we head back to Santon?" Thandiwe did not respond immediately. His mind was elsewhere. Back in the market. Back to her voice. Her name. Thandiwe. He closed his eyes briefly, and this time, the memory came closer. Not clear, but closer. A small girl running through a wide garden. Laughter. A voice calling Thandiwe. He opened his eyes, his jaw tightened slightly. "It couldn't be." "Could it, sir?" the driver asked again. Thandiwe leaned forward slightly. "Turn back," he said. The driver hesitated. "Back?" "To Soweto." "Yes." The answer was immediate. Firm. The car slowed, then turned. Back in the unfinished building, Thandiwe shifted slightly, trying to find a more comfortable position on the hard ground. The air had grown colder now, the night settling in fully. She pulled her shawl tighter around herself. Sleep still would not come. Too many thoughts, too many questions, and beneath it all a feeling she could not ignore. Something was changing. She didn't know how, she didn't know why, but she felt it. A faint rumble echoed in the distance. At first, she ignored it. Cars passed all the time. But this sound grew louder, closer, until headlights cut through the darkness outside, spilling light into the hollow structure. Thandiwe stiffened instantly. Her body tensed. Instinct, fear. She remained, still listening. The sound of an engine slowing, then stopping. Footsteps, measured, deliberate. Her breath caught in her throat. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice sharper than she intended. No answer, just the sound of steps approaching. Her heart began to pound. Her hand tightened against her stomach. "Please," she whispered under her breath. "Not tonight." The footsteps stopped, just outside the broken entrance. Then, a familiar voice. "Thandiwe." Her eyes widened. She knew that voice. She had heard it only once, but it had stayed. She pushed herself up slowly, her body tense, but steady. "Who is it?" she asked, though she already knew. A figure stepped into the dim light. Tall, composed, unmistakable. Thandiwe. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, thick, heavy, filled with everything that had not yet been said. "What are you doing here?" Thandiwe asked finally. Her voice was not welcoming, but it was not hostile either. It was cautious. Sifo looked around briefly, the broken walls, the exposed beams, the cold ground, then back at her. She lifted her chin slightly. "For tonight," she replied. "That is not safe. I know." "Then why? Because I have nowhere else," she said, cutting him off. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Sifo fell silent. For the first time since he had entered, he looked at her not as a question, but as a reality. And the reality was clear. She was alone. She was vulnerable. And she had accepted it. Something in his chest tightened, not out of pity, but something deeper. He took a step closer. "You shouldn't be here," he said more quietly. Thandiwe let out a small breath. "And yet, here I am." More carefully this time. The way she stood, the way she held herself, even now, even here. There was something unmistakable. Not wealth, not status, but something that came before both. Identity. He took another step. "Thandiwe," he said slowly. The name felt different now. Heavier. Closer to something real. "Yes," she answered. He hesitated. "Then, what is your full name?" he asked. The question seemed simple, but it changed everything. Thandiwe frowned slightly. "Why?" she asked. "Please," he said. There was something in his voice now. Not authority. Not curiosity. Something else. Something personal. She studied him for a moment, then answered, "Thandiwe Ndlovu." The name hung in the air. And this time, it didn't just echo. It landed. Hard. Sifo's breath caught. Just slightly, but enough. Because now, the memory was no longer distant. It was right there, waiting, and everything was about to change. The name did not fade. It stayed sharp, undeniable, echoing through Sifo's mind with a force that made everything else fall silent. Thandiwe Ndlovu. For a moment, the unfinished building, the cold air, the dim light, none of it mattered. All he could see was a memory rising to meet the present. A child's laughter, small feet running across marble floors, a voice, his voice calling after her, "Thandiwe." He blinked, and the memory snapped into place. His daughter, the one who had walked away. The one he had searched for. The one he had not found. Until now. He took a step back unconsciously, his chest tightening, as if something inside him had been struck. Thandiwe noticed immediately. "What is it?" she asked, her voice guarded. Sifo did not answer right away, because answering would mean accepting, and accepting would change everything. He looked at her again, really looked this time. The curve of her cheek, the steadiness in her eyes, even the way she stood despite exhaustion. It was all there. Older, worn by life, but unmistakable. "Where is your father?" he asked suddenly. The question came out sharper than he intended. Thandiwe stiffened. Her expression closed almost instantly. "I don't have one," she said. The answer was immediate, defensive, final. Sifo inhaled slowly. "That is not true," he said quietly. Her eyes flashed. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," he replied. "No," she said, shaking her head. "You don't." The air between them shifted. What had been uncertainty now edged toward confrontation. Sifo took another step forward. "I have been looking for you," he said. The words hung there. Heavy. Impossible. Thandiwe stared at him. For a second, just a second, something flickered in her eyes. Then it disappeared. "No," she said firmly. "You are mistaken." "I am not." "Yes, you are," she insisted. "People like you don't look for people like me." The words were not angry. They were certain. And that certainty cut deeper than any accusation. Sifo's jaw tightened. "You think I care about status?" he asked. "I think you live in a world where it matters," she replied. Silence, not empty, but filled with everything that had not been said for years. Sifo's voice lowered. "Thandiwe, look at me." She didn't want to, but she did. Slowly, reluctantly, their eyes met, and this time the feeling did not hide. It surged. Recognition, not clear, not complete, but undeniable. She frowned slightly. Her breathing changed. "Why?" She began, her voice softer, now uncertain. "Why do you look at me like that?" Saifo didn't answer immediately, because there was no gentle way to say it. "You are my daughter," he said. The words fell into the space between them, and everything stopped. Thandiwe didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. For a moment, the world simply paused. Then she laughed. Not loudly, not joyfully, but in disbelief. "No," she said, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible." "It is. My father is not." She stopped herself, her voice catching slightly. "Not what Sifo pressed. Not someone who would stand and watch while I was humiliated," she said. The words landed hard, direct, unfiltered. Sifo felt them. Every one of them. "I didn't know it was you," he said quietly, "but you saw what was happening. I needed to be sure." Of what she demanded. Of whether I deserved help. "No," he said firmly. "Of whether it was really you." Thandiwe's hands trembled slightly. "Do you know how that sounds?" she asked. "Yes," he admitted. "And you still said it, yes." Because truth, he knew, was not always kind. But it was necessary. She looked away, her chest rising and falling unevenly. "No," she whispered. "You're wrong." Sifo stepped closer again. "You left," he said. Her head snapped up. "I had to. You ran." "I survived," she corrected. Their voices did not rise, but the tension did. Years of distance compressing into a single moment. "You disappeared," he continued. No explanation. No message. "I tried," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You just didn't listen." The words hit differently. Sifo's expression shifted. "What do you mean?" Thandiwe laughed again, but this time there was pain in it. "Of course you don't remember," she said. "I would remember something like that." "No," she said softly. "You wouldn't." Silence. "Then I came to you," she continued. "The day I left, I tried to tell you what was happening, what I needed." "I don't. You were in a meeting," she cut in. "Important people, important deals, important everything." The memory flickered. Faint, unclear. "I waited," she said, "for hours." Her voice was steady now, too steady. "And when you finally saw me, you told me to come back later." Sifo's breath caught. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," she said. The truth settled between them. Heavy, unavoidable. "I thought I had more time," he said quietly. "I didn't." The words broke something. Not loudly, but completely. For a moment neither of them spoke, the weight of years pressing down. Then Thandiwe took a step back. "Not an easy one, not a good one, but mine." Sifo nodded slowly. "I can see that. And now you appear," she continued, her voice tightening, "telling me everything is different. I'm not saying it's simple." "No," she said. "You're saying it's fixable." He didn't answer, because that part he didn't know. She looked at him again. Longer this time. Searching. "Why now?" she asked. Sifo exhaled slowly. "Because I never stopped looking." The words were quiet, but real, and for the first time, she believed him. Just a little. But belief did not erase pain. It did not undo years. It did not rebuild trust. "I don't know what you expect," she said. "I don't expect anything," he replied. "Then why are you here?" Sifo looked around the broken building, then back at her. "Because you shouldn't be alone," he said. Thandiwe's hand moved to her stomach again. Instinctively. "I'm not," she said. Sifo followed the gesture. His eyes softened slightly. "Then at least let me help." She hesitated. Not because she wanted to say yes, but because part of her did. And that was what scared her most. The silence stretched. Fragile. Uncertain. And somewhere deep inside both of them, something had begun. Not healing. Not yet. But something close. Because the truth had finally been spoken. And once truth is out, nothing stays the same. The silence that followed did not break easily. It lingered between them, thick, fragile, uncertain, like something that could shatter with a single wrong word. Thandiwe stood where she was, her arms folded lightly across her body, one hand still resting against her stomach. Her eyes did not leave Sifo, but they were no longer filled with disbelief. Now, they were searching, careful, guarded. Sifo did not move closer again. He understood that distance mattered now, not physical distance, but something deeper. Trust, once fractured, did not return simply because truth had been spoken. So he waited, not as a businessman used to controlling outcomes, but as a father who no longer had that right. "Say something," he said finally, his voice quiet. Thandiwe let out a slow breath. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. It was the first honest thing she had allowed herself to give him. Sifo nodded. "That's fair." Another pause. "Then, you said you were looking for me," she continued, her tone steady but cautious. "For how long? Since the day you left," he replied. Her brow tightened slightly. "Years," she asked. "Yes. And you didn't find me." "Until today I came close," he said. "More than once." Her eyes narrowed faintly. "Then why didn't you keep trying harder?" The question was not shouted, but it carried accusation. Sifo didn't avoid it. "I did," he said. "But the truth is, I was looking for the girl you were." Thandiwe blinked. "And I am not her anymore," she said. "I know," he replied. The words settled, not as rejection, but as recognition. She turned slightly, walking a few steps away, her fingers brushing against the rough wall as she tried to process everything. "I thought you chose your life over me," she said quietly. Sifo's chest tightened. "I thought you chose to leave," he answered. They both stopped, facing away from each other. Two versions of the same past, neither fully right, neither completely wrong. Thandiwe leaned her head back against the wall. "You always had time for business," she said. "For meetings. For people who needed something from you." Sifo closed his eyes briefly. "And I thought I was building something for you," he said. The irony hung heavy. Unspoken, but clear. She let out a small breath. "Did you ever think? Maybe I didn't need all that." His answer came softer. "Not enough." Silence again. But this time, it was different. Less sharp. More reflective. Thandiwe turned back toward him slowly. "And now?" she asked. Sifo met her gaze. "Now I know I was wrong." There was no defense in his voice. No excuse. Just truth. That, more than anything else, reached her. Not fully, but enough to soften something. She walked back toward where she had been sitting earlier and lowered herself carefully to the ground again. Her body was tired, the events of the day catching up to her all at once. Sifo watched. Then, after a brief hesitation, he moved closer, but not too close, and sat down as well, leaving space between them. For a moment, neither spoke. The night air had grown colder, the distant sounds of the city fading into a low hum. Thandiwe pulled her shawl tighter. Sifo noticed. Without a word, he removed his jacket and placed it gently beside her. She looked at it, then at him. "I didn't ask for that," she said. "I know," he replied. She hesitated, then slowly picked it up and wrapped it around herself. "Thank you," she said quietly. Sifo nodded once. A small step, but a real one. They sat like that for a while. Two people connected by blood, separated by years, trying to understand what came next. "Who is the father?" Sifo asked eventually. The question came carefully, measured, but it still landed heavily. Thandiwe's expression changed immediately. Not anger, not shame. Something else. Pain. "He's gone," she said. Sifo frowned. "Gone where he left," she replied simply. The words were enough. Sifo's jaw tightened slightly. "Does he know?" he asked. "Yes. And he still left." Thandiwe nodded once. Sifo looked away briefly, his expression hardening not toward her but toward the man who was no longer there. "He doesn't deserve you," he said. Thandiwe gave a small, almost tired smile. "That's not what matters anymore." "What matters then?" She placed her hand gently over her stomach. "This." Sifo followed her gaze. For a moment his expression softened in a way it hadn't before, not as a businessman, not even fully as a father, but as something in between. "Have you seen a doctor?" he asked. Thandiwe shook her head. "Not properly," she admitted. "Why not?" She gave him a look that answered everything. Money. Access. Reality. Sifo exhaled slowly. "That changes now," he said. Thandiwe's expression tightened again. "No," she said immediately. "Thandiwe," I said no. Her voice was firmer this time. Not aggressive, but clear. "I don't want to depend on you," she continued. Not like that. Saipho held her gaze. This is not about dependency, he said. It's about care. I've been caring for myself, she replied, and struggling, he added. Yes, she said, but it's mine. The words carried weight. Ownership. Identity. Saipho nodded slowly. I understand, he said. She looked at him surprised. Do you not fully, he admitted. But I'm trying. That honesty. It mattered. More than promises. More than authority. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. I don't know how to do this, she said quietly. Neither do I, he replied. A small silence followed. Then maybe we don't need to know yet, he added. Maybe we just start. Thandiwe considered that. Start. Not fix. Not erase. Just begin. It sounded possible. Not easy, but possible. She leaned back slightly against the wall again, her body finally beginning to relax, even if just a little. I'm tired, she admitted. I know, Saipho said softly. I didn't expect today to turn into this. Neither did I. A faint smile touched her lips, just for a moment, then faded. But it was there, and Saipho saw it. He didn't comment. He didn't push. He simply let it exist, because some things needed space to grow. The night deepened around them. Cool, quiet, and for the first time in a long time, Thandiwe did not feel completely alone. Not safe, not secure, not healed, but not alone. And sometimes, that was enough for a beginning. The night did not feel as cold anymore. Not because the air had changed, but because something between them had. They still sat apart, still careful, still unsure. But the silence was no longer hostile. It had softened, settling into something quieter. Something that did not demand answers right away. Thandiwe leaned her head slightly against the wall, her eyes half closed, her body finally allowing itself to rest. The weight of the day of the past pressed heavily on her, but for the first time in months it was not crushing her alone. Saipho watched her carefully, not in the way he had watched people in meetings or negotiations. This was different. There was no calculation in it, only attention, only presence. You should sleep, he said gently. Thandiwe gave a faint shake of her head. I'm afraid to, she admitted. Saipho frowned slightly. Why? She hesitated, then answered, because when I wake up, I don't know if this will still be real. The words were soft, but they carried something fragile. Saipho understood, more than she expected. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She opened her eyes and looked at him. You can't promise that. I can promise that I won't disappear again, he replied. The distinction mattered. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. That's enough for now. Another small step. Saipho leaned back slightly against the wall, giving her space. Rest, he said again. This time she didn't argue. Slowly, she adjusted herself, using the folded shawl beneath her head, the jacket wrapped around her body. One hand rested on her stomach, the other curled loosely at her side. Her breathing steadied, her eyes closed, and gradually sleep came. Not deep, not peaceful, but real. Saipho remained awake. He had not slept in situations far more comfortable than this. And tonight, sleep was not what he needed. His gaze stayed on her, on the rise and fall of her chest, on the quiet strength in her, even now. His daughter. The word still felt strange, not because it wasn't true, but because of everything that had happened in between. Years lost, moments missed, a life he had not been part of. And now he was sitting on cold concrete, watching over her as she slept in a place no one should have to call shelter. He exhaled slowly. I failed you, he murmured under his breath. The words were not meant for her, but they existed now, and that mattered. Hours passed. The night deepened, then slowly began to lift. The first hint of dawn crept into the sky, pale and quiet. Thandiwe stirred. A slight movement at first, then more. Her fingers tightened briefly against her stomach before she opened her eyes. For a moment, she didn't remember. Then she saw him, still there, exactly where she had left him, watching. Not intrusive, not distant, just there. She blinked slowly. You stayed, she said, her voice still heavy with sleep. Saipho nodded. I said I would, She sat up carefully, adjusting the jacket around her. You didn't have to. I know. She studied him, then looked away. Not rejecting, just processing. Morning light filtered into the broken structure, revealing everything more clearly. The cracked walls, the dust, the reality of where they were. It looked worse in daylight. Thandiwe noticed him taking it in. This is not new for me, she said quietly. Sifo's expression tightened slightly. It shouldn't be normal for anyone, he replied. She didn't argue, because part of her agreed, but another part had already adapted. She stood slowly, stretching slightly, wincing just a little as her body reminded her of yesterday's fall. Sifo noticed immediately. You're in pain, he said. I'm fine. You're not. She turned toward him. I've been worse, she said simply. That wasn't reassurance. It was truth. Sifo stood as well. This ends today, he said. Thandiwe frowned. What does that mean? It means you're not staying here again, he replied. Her posture shifted instantly. Defensive. I told you I know what you told me, he said, and I respect it. She blinked slightly, not expecting that. But this is not about pride, he continued. This is about safety. I can take care of myself. You shouldn't have to like this. The words were firm, not controlling, but grounded. She hesitated. Then what are you suggesting, she asked. Sifo took a breath. Come with me, he said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Thandiwe stared at him. To where, she asked. My home. The air shifted again, heavier, more complicated. No, she said immediately. Sifo didn't react. He expected that. You don't trust me, he said. It's not that simple. It is, he replied gently. You either do or you don't. She looked away. I don't know you anymore, she said. The words landed, but they were fair. I know, he said. And I don't belong in your world, she added. Sifo stepped closer, not too close. Just enough. You do, he said. No, she shook her head. I don't. He didn't argue. Not directly. Instead, you belong wherever you choose to stand, he said. Not where people expect you to. She looked at him again. That she hadn't expected. Silence followed. Then I'm not asking you to stay forever, he continued. Just come somewhere safe, for now. Thandiwe's hand moved to her stomach again. Instinct. Protection. Safety. The word mattered more now. Not for her. For the child. She exhaled slowly. I don't want to be controlled, she said. You won't be. I don't want to owe you. You don't. She hesitated, then asked the question that mattered most. If I come, I can leave whenever I want. Sifo nodded. Anytime. And you won't stop me, I won't. She studied his face, searching. For doubt, for hesitation. There was none. Only certainty. That made the decision harder. Because now, it was hers. Fully. She looked around the building one more time. The broken walls, the cold ground, the reality she had accepted. Then back at him. The unknown. The past. The possibility. Her heart tightened. Then slowly she nodded. Just for now, she said. Sifo didn't smile. Didn't react strongly. He simply nodded once. That's enough. And with that, everything shifted. Not completely. Not permanently. But enough to move them forward. Together. For the first time in years, the drive out of Soweto was quiet. Not because there was nothing to say, but because neither of them knew where to begin. Thandiwe sat in the back seat of the black SUV, her hands resting in her lap, her fingers loosely interlocked as if holding herself together. The soft hum of the engine filled the space between her and Sifo, who sat across from her, angled slightly but not intruding. She had never been inside a car like this before. Not in this version of her life. The seats were too smooth, the air too cool, the silence too controlled. It didn't feel like comfort. It felt like distance. Her eyes drifted to the window. Soweto passed by at first, familiar streets, small shops, children running barefoot, women sweeping in front of their homes. Life as she knew it. Then gradually, it began to change. The roads widened, the buildings grew taller, the noise softened, and with each passing minute the gap between where she had been and where she was going became harder to ignore. Sifo noticed the shift in her expression. "You can ask me to turn back," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "I won't," she replied. "Why not?" Because going back meant choosing the life she had just agreed to leave behind. Because going forward meant stepping into something she didn't trust. Because either way, she would lose something. "I've already decided," she said simply. Sifo nodded. He didn't push further. Outside, the city transformed completely now. Clean streets, glass buildings, security gates. A different world. Thandiwe's reflection in the window stared back at her dust, still clinging to her dress, her hair slightly undone, her body carrying the weight of everything she had endured. She didn't belong here. The thought came quickly. Sharp, uninvited. She shifted slightly in her seat. "Do people know I'm coming?" she asked suddenly. Sifo's eyes moved to her. "No," she frowned. "Why not?" "Because this is not for them," he said. "It's for you." The answer surprised her, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. No performance, no display, just intention. Still, that didn't ease everything. The car slowed, then stopped. Thandiwe looked up. Ahead of them stood a large gate, tall, secure, guarded. Beyond it, she could see only glimpses. Green, open, expansive. The gate opened without question. The car moved forward. And just like that, she crossed a line she had once known, but no longer recognized. The house stood quietly at the center of it all. Not loud, not showy, but undeniably powerful in its presence. Wide windows, clean lines, space. So much space. The car came to a stop. The door opened. Thandiwe didn't move immediately. Her body felt heavy, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of stepping into something she had left behind. Sifo stepped out first, then turned slightly. "You don't have to rush," he said. She nodded faintly. Then slowly, she stepped out. The ground beneath her feet felt different, smooth, stable, unfamiliar. A woman approached from the entrance, middle-aged, composed, observant. Her eyes moved quickly, taking in Thandiwe's appearance, her condition, her presence. Then she looked at Sifo. "Sir," she said respectfully. Sifo nodded. "This is Thandiwe," he said. The name lingered. The woman's expression shifted slightly, not in recognition but in awareness. "Welcome," she said gently. Thandiwe gave a small nod. Not comfortable, but not resistant. "Her name is Lindiwe," Sifo added quietly to Thandiwe. "She manages the house." Thandiwe glanced at her again. Lindiwe, another name that felt familiar, but she said nothing. "Prepare a room," Sifo continued. "Something quiet." Lindiwe nodded immediately. "Yes, sir." She turned and walked ahead, guiding them inside. The interior was even quieter than the outside. Soft, light, clean surfaces. Everything in its place, nothing out of order. Thandiwe's steps slowed instinctively. Her eyes moved from one space to another. The hallway, the staircase, the furniture. Each detail felt like a memory she couldn't fully reach. "You used to run through here," Sifo said softly. She stopped. "What?" He gestured lightly. "When you were small," he said. "You never walked, always running." Her chest tightened. "I don't remember that," she said. "That's okay," he replied, but something in her expression suggested she wanted to. Lindiwe stopped at a door and opened it. "This room is ready," she said. Thandiwe stepped inside slowly. The space was simple, comfortable. A bed, a chair, a window letting in soft light. Nothing overwhelming. But everything she didn't have. She turned slightly. "I can't stay long," she said. Sifo nodded. "I know. I mean it. I believe you." That helped. Just a little. Lindiwe stepped forward. "There are clothes here," she said gently, "and water. You can rest." Thandiwe looked at her. "Thank you." Lindiwe smiled faintly, then stepped back, leaving them alone. For a moment, neither spoke. "Then I'll be nearby," Sifo said. "If you need anything." Thandiwe hesitated, then asked, "Why didn't you tell them, tell who, that I'm your daughter?" Sifo paused, then answered honestly, "Because that's not what you need right now." She studied him. "And what do I need? Time," he said. The answer settled. "Not perfect, but right." She nodded slowly. "I think I do. Sifo stepped back toward the door, then stopped. Thandiwe, he said. She looked up. I'm glad I found you. The words were simple, but real. She didn't answer immediately. Then me too, she said quietly. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Sifo left. The door closed softly behind him. Thandiwe stood in the center of the room alone again, but not the same kind of alone. She walked slowly to the bed and sat down. Her hand moved to her stomach. We're safe, she whispered. For the first time, the word didn't feel distant. It felt possible. And outside that room, things were already beginning to change, because the truth was no longer hidden. It was just waiting to be revealed. The house did not sleep the way Soweto did. There were no sudden bursts of laughter outside the window, no distant music fighting against the night, no restless footsteps passing by. Everything here moved quietly, controlled almost as if the walls themselves had agreed to keep things in order. For Thandiwe, that silence felt unfamiliar, too clean, too still. She lay on the bed but did not fully rest. The softness beneath her felt undeserved, almost unreal, like something borrowed rather than owned. Her hand remained on her stomach, her breathing slow but uneven, as her thoughts drifted between past and present. She had not expected to come here. Not like this. Not after everything. Her eyes moved toward the ceiling, tracing invisible lines as memories surfaced, not clearly, not fully, but enough to unsettle her. Fragments. A staircase. A voice calling her name. A feeling of belonging she had once taken for granted. She turned, slightly pressing her face into the pillow. Don't think about it, she whispered. But memory did not obey. Across the house, Sifo stood in his study, the lights dimmed, one hand resting on the edge of his desk. Papers lay untouched before him, his phone silent, his usual world temporarily paused. He had canceled his meetings. Not postponed. Canceled. That alone would have shocked anyone who knew him. But tonight, nothing felt more important than what had just walked back into his life. Thandiwe. He said her name quietly under his breath, testing it, feeling it, as if saying it enough times would make up for all the years he hadn't. A soft knock came at the door. Come in, he said. Thandiwe entered, closing the door gently behind her. She is resting, she said. Sifo nodded. Good. Thandiwe hesitated, then stepped closer. Sir. Who is she? She asked carefully. Sifo did not answer immediately, because once he said it, everything would begin to change. He exhaled slowly. She is my daughter. The words settled into the room. Thandiwe's eyes widened slightly. Your daughter, she repeated. Sifo nodded. The one who left, he added. Understanding crossed her face. I see, she said quietly. There was no judgment in her tone, only acknowledgement. She looks. Thandiwe gave a small nod. And strong, she added. Sifo allowed himself a faint smile. Yes, he said. She is both. A brief silence followed. Then Thandiwe spoke again. Does she want people to know? Sifo shook his head. Not yet. Then we will respect that, she said immediately. Sifo met her eyes. Thank you. Thandiwe inclined her head slightly. There is something else, she added. She has not seen a doctor. Sifo's expression tightened. I know. I can arrange. Not yet, he interrupted gently. She needs to feel in control first. Thandiwe considered that, then nodded. You are learning, she said softly. Sifo looked at her. What do you mean? You are listening now, she replied. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Sifo didn't respond. Because she was right. And he knew it. Morning came slowly. Soft light filtered through the curtains, touching the edges of the room where Thandiwe lay. She stirred slightly, her body adjusting to a space that did not press against her, a silence that did not demand vigilance. Her eyes opened. For a moment, confusion flickered. Then memory returned. The house, the room, him. She sat up slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Still there, still safe. She exhaled. The air felt different, cleaner, but also heavier. Because now she had choices, and choices came with consequences. A soft knock came at the door. She stiffened slightly. Yes, she called. The door opened just enough for Thandiwe to step in. Good morning, she said gently. Thandiwe nodded. Good morning. I brought something for you, Thandiwe added, placing a tray on the small table nearby. Tea, bread, fruit. Simple, but more than she had eaten in days. Thandiwe's eyes lingered on it. Thank you, she said quietly. Thandiwe studied her for a moment, then spoke. You are safe here. The words were meant to reassure, but they also carried expectation. Thandiwe nodded. I know. But knowing was not the same as believing. Thandiwe didn't push. If you need anything, I am here, she said. Then she stepped back and left. Thandiwe waited until the door closed before moving. She reached for the tea first, her hands steady but careful. The warmth spread through her, slowly grounding her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. Then the bread. She ate slowly, not rushing, as if trying to convince herself this moment was real. Halfway through, she stopped. Her eyes filled slightly. Not from sadness, but from something more complicated. Relief. She placed the food down and wiped her eyes quickly. No, she whispered, don't get used to this. Because getting used to it meant depending on it. And she wasn't ready for that. Later, she stepped out of the room. Carefully. Cautiously. The hallway stretched before her just as she had seen the night before. But now, in daylight, it felt different. Clearer. More familiar. Her steps slowed as she moved forward. Her eyes moved over the walls, the framed pictures, the small details. Something tugged at her again. A memory, just out of reach. She stopped in front of one frame. A photograph, a younger Saipho, and beside him, a child. Small. Smiling. Her breath caught. She stepped closer. Her hand lifted slightly, hovering near the glass. That's, she whispered. The door behind her opened softly. Saipho stepped into the hallway. He saw where she stood, what she was looking at, and for a moment he said nothing. He just watched. Because this was not something he could force. Thandiwe turned slowly. Her eyes met his. This is me, she said. It wasn't a question. It was realization. Saipho nodded. Yes. She looked back at the photo. Then at him again. I don't remember this, she said. That's okay, he replied. But I feel it, she added. Saipho's expression softened. I know. She stepped back slightly. This place, she said slowly. It's not completely unfamiliar. It's your home, he said. The word lingered. Home. Thandiwe's chest tightened. I don't know if it still is, she said. Saipho didn't argue. Then we don't have to call it that yet, he replied. She looked at him, surprised. Then what do we call it, he thought for a moment. Then answered simply, a place to start again. The words settled, not perfect, but enough. Thandiwe nodded slowly. Yes, she said. That I can accept. And in that moment, something shifted again, not loudly. Not dramatically, but deeply. Because the past was no longer just something behind them. It was beginning to reconnect. Piece by piece. And soon, the rest of the world would see it too. The house no longer felt entirely foreign, not familiar but no longer distant. There was a subtle shift in the way Thandiwe moved through the space that morning. Her steps were still careful, still measured, but they were no longer hesitant in the same way. She no longer walked like someone afraid of being told she did not belong. Now she walked like someone who was trying to remember. Saipho noticed. He did not comment on it. He simply allowed it, because forcing recognition would break it. And what was happening now needed to unfold slowly. Naturally, Thandiwe stood by the window in the main sitting area, her fingers lightly touching the edge of the frame as she looked out over the garden. It was quiet, green, controlled nothing like the unpredictable streets she had come from. Yet something about it stirred something inside her. I used to play out there, she said suddenly. Saipho, who had been standing a few steps behind, went still. You remember? He asked softly. She shook her head slightly. Not clearly, she admitted. But I feel like I did. He nodded. You did, he said. You used to run barefoot on that grass, even when it rained. A faint smile touched her lips. That sounds like me, she said. It is, he replied. The moment lingered. Gentle. Fragile. Then, it shifted. Thandiwe turned away from the window, her expression tightening just slightly. "Why didn't you come after me yourself?" she asked. The question came without warning. Direct. Unavoidable. Saifo did not look away. "I did," he said. She shook her head. "No," she said. "Not like this. Not really." Her voice was calm, but it carried something deeper now. A wound that had not fully healed. "You sent people," she continued. "Investigators. Drivers. Assistants." Saifo's jaw tightened. "Yes. But not you," she said. The truth settled. Heavy. Uncomfortable. He exhaled slowly. "I thought I was doing what was necessary," he said. "And what was necessary?" she asked. "To find you." "No," she said quietly. "To control the situation." The words landed. Harder than anything she had said before. Saifo felt them, because they were not entirely wrong. "I didn't know where you were," he said. "And when you did," he hesitated. "That was enough." Thandiwe nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." She turned slightly, putting distance between them again. "I was waiting for you," she said. Her voice was softer now, but more painful. "Not for your people, not for your money, just you." Sifo's chest tightened. "I didn't realize that," he admitted. "I know," she replied. "And that was the problem. Not anger, not betrayal, but absence." He took a step closer. "I can't change what I did," he said. "No," she agreed. "You can't. But I can choose what I do now." She turned back toward him. "And what is that?" she asked. "To be here," he said. "The way I should have been before." The words were simple, but this time, they didn't sound like a promise. They sounded like a decision. Thandiwe studied him carefully, searching, not for perfection, but for truth. "Why now?" she asked again. Sifo held her gaze. "Because I saw you," he said. "That's all it took." "No," he replied. "It's what it revealed." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" He gestured lightly. "In the market," he said. "The way you stood, the way you spoke, the way you refused help." "That's when I knew I had not lost you," he continued. The words landed differently, not as control, not as ownership, but as recognition. "You thought I was gone?" she asked. "I thought I had failed you completely," he admitted. Silence. "Then, maybe you did," she said. The words were quiet, but they didn't cut the same way. Not anymore. Because now they were being said without anger. Only truth. Saifo nodded slowly. "Maybe I did," he said. Another pause. "Then, but you're here now," he added. She looked at him. "And that changes everything?" she asked. "No," he said. "It just gives us a chance. A chance. Not a guarantee. Not a solution. A beginning." Thandiwe exhaled slowly. Her hand moved again to her stomach. "A grounding habit now. What if I don't want things to go back to how they were?" she asked. Saifo shook his head. "They won't." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "How can you be sure, because you're not the same person?" he said. "And neither am I." She held his gaze. "Testing that. Measuring it." "Prove it," she said. The words came without hesitation. Saifo didn't react defensively. He nodded. How Thandiwe thought for a moment. Then, "Stop trying to fix everything," she said. He blinked slightly. "That's what you always do," she continued. "You see a problem and you solve it." "That's not always wrong," he replied. "No," she said. "But it's not always what people need." He considered that. Then nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she repeated, surprised. "Yes. You're not going to argue?" "No." "You're not going to explain?" "No." The answer caught her off guard. Not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. It was quiet, honest, uncomplicated. And that was new. She looked away, briefly processing. Then back at him. "Then listen," she said. "I am he," replied. "I don't need you to rescue me," she continued. "I know. I don't need your money. I understand. But I might need," she hesitated, then finished time. Sifo nodded. "You have it. And space. You have that too." She exhaled slowly. "And respect. You already have that," he said. The words settled between them. Clear, unforced. And for the first time it felt like they were not speaking from opposite sides, but from somewhere closer. Not the same place, but closer. Thandiwe's shoulders relaxed slightly. Not completely, but enough. I don't forgive you yet, she said. I know, Sifo replied, but I'm not walking away. That meant everything. Sifo nodded once. That's enough for me. The moment held, quiet, real. And outside the walls of the house, the world was still moving, still unaware, still waiting. Because soon, what had been hidden would come into the light. And when it did, everything would change again. News does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it moves quietly through whispers, through glances, through the invisible threads that connect people long before truth is spoken aloud. And in a city like Johannesburg, where power and poverty lived side by side, secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. It began in the market. A video, shaky, incomplete, but clear enough, circulated from phone to phone. It showed a pregnant woman being accused, pushed, surrounded by laughter. It showed her falling. And then, it showed a man stepping forward, calm, controlled, watching, intervening. Some recognized him immediately. Others didn't, but those who did not stay silent. That's him, someone said. That's Thandiwe Ndlovu. The name spread faster than the video, and suddenly the moment that had once belonged only to a small crowd in Soweto became something else entirely. A question, a story, a spectacle. By midday, it had reached places it was never meant to reach. Corporate offices, private meetings, boardrooms where decisions were made in quiet voices and sealed with signatures. Sifo's phone remained silent. Because he had turned it off, but the world around him had not stopped moving. And now, it was moving toward him. Inside the house, the morning had passed gently. Thandiwe sat in the garden, her feet resting lightly against the grass, her hands folded over her stomach as she watched the breeze move through the trees. It felt different here, not because it was better, but because it was still. No judgment, no noise, no need to defend herself, just space. Sifo stood a few steps away, speaking quietly with Thandiwe. People are asking questions, Thandiwe said softly. I expected that, Sifo replied. They have seen the video. Sifo nodded. And they have seen you, she added. He exhaled slowly. Of course they have. Thandiwe hesitated. Do you want me to respond? Sifo looked toward Thandiwe. She hadn't noticed them yet. She was focused on something small, a bird landing near her, her expression soft, almost peaceful. No, he said quietly. Not yet. Thandiwe followed his gaze, and when they asked about her, Sifo's expression tightened slightly. They won't, he said. Thandiwe frowned. They will, she replied gently, because the world always did. Sifo didn't answer immediately, because he knew she was right. And that was the problem. Later that afternoon it happened, not loudly, not dramatically, but inevitably. Thandiwe stepped back inside her steps slower now, her body beginning to feel the strain of the day. She moved carefully down the hallway, her hand brushing lightly against the wall. Then she heard it. Voices, from a nearby room, unfamiliar, sharp, concerned. We need to address this now. What exactly is happening? Is that really him? Who is the woman? Thandiwe stopped. Her breath caught slightly. She hadn't expected anyone else to be here. She hadn't expected the outside world to arrive so quickly. She turned slightly toward the door. It was open just enough for her to see inside. Two men, well-dressed, tense. Sifo stood across from them, composed, but firm. This is not your concern, he was saying. With respect, it is, one of the men replied. Your name is involved. Sifo's expression didn't change. My name has always been involved in something, he said. This is different, the other man added. There is a video, I am aware. And the woman, that is enough, Sifo said. The room fell silent. Thandiwe stepped back slightly, her heart beginning to race. She understood now. The world she had entered was not quiet. It was controlled. But beneath that control there was pressure, expectation, exposure. She turned away from the door, but it was too late. The moment had already reached her. Sifo noticed her immediately when he stepped out. She was standing at the end of the hallway, her posture tense, her expression no longer calm. He dismissed the men without another word. They left reluctantly, silently, but not without consequence. The door closed. Sifo walked toward her. "You heard," he said. It wasn't a question. Thandiwe nodded. "They know," she said. "Some of them. And soon, all of them." Sifo didn't deny it. "No," he said. She let out a slow breath. "I didn't want this," she said. "I know. I don't want to be." "Exposed," she continued. "You won't be." She looked at him. "You can't control that." "I can control what I say," he replied. "And what about what others say?" she asked. Sifo held her gaze. "That's not what matters." "It matters to me," she said. The words were sharp, not angry, but clear. Sifo nodded slowly. "Then we protect what we can," he said. She shook her head slightly. "That's not enough." Silence. "Then what do you want?" he asked. The question landed differently now. Because it wasn't about solving. It was about listening. Thandiwe took a moment, then answered, "I want to choose when people know who I am." Sifo nodded. "That's fair. And I want it to be because I say it," she added. "Not because of a video." Sifo's expression softened slightly. "Then, that's how it will be." She studied him. "You can't promise that." "I can promise that I won't be the one to take that choice from you," he said. The distinction mattered. Again. She exhaled slowly. Her hand moved to her stomach. "Grounding. Always grounding. I don't want to be seen as your daughter," she said. "Not yet." Sifo nodded. "I understand. I want to be seen as myself," she continued. "And who is that?" he asked gently. She looked at him, then answered, "Someone who survived." The words settled, strong, earned, real. Sifo nodded. "Then that's who you are. No argument, no correction, just acceptance." And for the first time, she believed him. Not fully, but enough. The moment held. "Then things are going to change," Sifo said quietly. Thandiwe nodded. "I know, and it won't be easy. I know that too." He looked at her, then added, "But you won't face it alone." She hesitated. "Then I'm starting to believe that," she said. And that was the closest thing to trust they had reached so far. Outside, the city continued to move. The story continued to spread. And the moment they had both been avoiding was coming closer. Because soon, the truth would not just be known. It would be seen. And when that happened, everything would be tested. Not just their past, but who they chose to become next. By the third day, silence was no longer possible. The video had spread beyond control, shared across phones, replayed on screens, discussed in taxis, in offices, in quiet corners of the city where people spoke in lowered voices but listened with full attention. A pregnant woman, a public accusation, a powerful man stepping in. And now, questions. Too many questions. Who was she? Why was he there? What was the connection? Speculation filled the gaps where truth had not yet arrived. But truth was already standing inside the house, waiting. Thandiwe stood in front of the mirror in her room, her hands resting lightly against the edge of the dresser. She had changed into one of the simple dresses Thandiwe had provided, clean, comfortable, nothing extravagant. She studied her reflection, not the dust-covered version of herself from the market, not the fragile image others had projected onto her, but herself. Still tired, still healing, still uncertain, but stronger than before. Her hand moved slowly to her stomach. "We don't hide forever," she whispered. The words weren't brave. They were necessary. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in," she said. Sifo stepped inside. He paused when he saw her, not because of how she looked, but because of how she stood. There was something different, steadier. "What is it?" he asked. Thandiwe turned to face him. "I'm ready," she said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Sifo didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. For what he said anyway, giving her space to define it. She met his gaze. "To stop hiding," she replied. Silence. "Then are you sure?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, "but I don't think waiting will make it easier." Sifo nodded slowly. He respected that. "Then we do it your way," he said. "My way means I speak first," she said. "You will, and no one interrupts." They won't. and you don't turn it into something bigger than it is. Sifo almost smiled. That might be difficult. She gave him a look. I know, but I'll try, he said. That was enough. The press did not arrive with chaos. They arrived with precision. Cameras, microphones, controlled voices asking controlled questions. But beneath it, there was hunger. For answers, for truth, for a story. They gathered outside the gate, waiting. Sifo stood just inside his posture, calm, his presence steady. Thandiwe stood beside him. Not behind, not hidden. Beside. That mattered. The gate opened. And just like that, the world saw her. For a moment, everything paused. The cameras adjusted. The voices quieted. Because what they expected was not what they saw. They expected weakness. They saw strength. They expected shame. They saw dignity. Thandiwe stepped forward. Her movements were slow but deliberate. Every step chosen. Every breath measured. She reached the front. The microphones lifted. The cameras focused. And still, she did not rush. She looked out at them. At the people who had seen her fall. At the people who had judged without knowing. At the people who were now waiting for her to explain herself. She didn't. Not in the way they expected. My name is Thandiwe Ndlovu, she said. Her voice was calm, clear, unshaken. I am the woman you saw in that video. No denial, no deflection, just truth. A murmur moved through the crowd. She continued. I was accused of stealing, she said. I was pushed. I was laughed at. Her hand moved to her stomach. Instinctively, I was alone. Silence. Deep. Complete. Then I am not here to ask for sympathy, she added. The words landed differently. Unexpected. I am here because what happened to me happens to many people every day. A shift. Subtle, but real. This is not about one moment in a market, she continued. It is about how quickly we decide who someone is, without knowing their story. The cameras held steady. No one interrupted. Because this was not the story they thought they were covering. She took a breath. Then, yes, she said. I am Thandiwe Ndlovu's daughter. The words landed, like a quiet explosion. Gasps, whispers, phones lifting higher. But Thandiwe did not react. She stood still, grounded. And I chose to leave that life, she continued. Sifo did not move. He did not speak. He did exactly what she asked. He listened. I chose to walk away, she said, and I lived a different life. A harder one. Her voice didn't break. Because it didn't need to. I was not treated differently because of who I am, she said. I was treated based on what people saw. She paused, then added, and what people saw was not the truth. Silence again, but this time it felt different. Not empty, but reflective. She looked out at them. All I ask, she said, is that next time, you ask before you judge. The words settled. Simple, but powerful. She stepped back, not dramatically, just enough. Sifo stepped forward slightly, but not to take over, only to stand beside her. A reporter finally spoke. Sir, did you know she was your daughter in that video? Sifo looked at Thandiwe, then answered. No, he said, and now he paused. Then now I am listening to her. The answer surprised them, but it was enough. Another question. Will there be action taken against those involved? Sifo's expression remained calm. There will be accountability, he said, but he did not elaborate, because this moment was not about power, it was about truth. Later, when the cameras were gone, when the gate closed, when the noise faded, Thandiwe stood in the same place, but everything felt different. Not easier, but clearer. Sifo turned to her. You did well, he said. She shook her head slightly. I did what I needed to, she replied. He nodded. That's what matters. She looked at him. Then, thank you, she said. Not for the house, not for the protection, but for something else. For listening, for staying, for not taking her voice away. Sifo understood. You don't owe me that, he said. I know, she replied. A small silence followed. Then, "What happens now?" she asked. Saifo considered that, then answered honestly, "Now, we build something new." She nodded slowly, not fully certain, but willing, and that was enough, because the story was no longer about what had happened. It was about what came next. And for the first time, they would face it together, not as who they used to be, but as who they had become. Sometimes the world decides who you are before you even get a chance to speak. It looks at your clothes, your situation, your struggles, and builds a story around you that has nothing to do with your truth. But this story reminds us of something deeper. That dignity does not come from wealth, that strength is not always loud, and that kindness or cruelty reveals more about us than the person we judge. Thandiwe was not saved because she was rich. She was seen because she stood in her truth. And maybe that's the real lesson. Before you judge someone, pause. Before you laugh, ask. Before you walk away, look again, because you never know who someone truly is or what they've survived. If this story touched you, tell me, what would you have done in that market? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this.